Anyway, on that note, we have David Adler, who's coming on right now. David, can you see me?
I can see you perfectly. I can hear you
All right, and I
perfectly.
can hear you perfectly, and I can see you perfectly as well. Let's pop this out real quick. Let me hide my show non-video participants. Let's black that. Okay. David Adler is in the building, ladies and gentlemen. David, how would you introduce yourself to my audience? We've been in contact over other issues in the past, but I'm very excited to have you here, and I'm glad that you are safe. David was a participant in the Gaza Sumud flotilla, and he was kidnapped and detained, apprehended, and tortured by the Israeli occupational forces. But now David is a free man once again.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Hassan. It's been a harrowing few days, and I'm happy to walk through the whole tale of what happened after the cameras stopped rolling and
Yeah,
after the flotillas were intercepted at sea 1 week ago, and we were disappeared into the middle of the Negev desert. So pleasure to be with you, and apologies
yeah.
for looking haggard from
No, you
days
don't look
of.
haggard at all. You look handsome as hell. So David, before we get into all that stuff, one of the questions that I have for you is because I was doing some coverage on the American perspectives on sympathizing with Palestinians or Israelis. More, it seems as though there is a notable market tide shift here, and Americans are now sympathizing with Palestinians more than Israelis for the first time in U.S. history. It seems. Do you have any statements or any opinion on that?
Yeah, I think it's part of a global shift. I mean, I think it's important to situate the genocide in Gaza and the global response as being not just a humanitarian crisis and not just a crisis of conscience, but also a democratic crisis. I mean, it's not just happening in the US. You have the peoples of the world who are revolting in the name of the most fundamental principles of humanity and decency and international law. And you have these complicit governments all across the world, everyone from the Emiratis to the French to the Canadians in the United States, who continue to act in ways that are entirely beholden to, of course, Zionist lobbies, but Israeli security interests and sustaining, holding the line on a genocide. And the flotilla, in that way, is an act of, beautiful act of humanitarian direct action, but an act of frustration as well, to just be like, if the governments of the world won't act, well, then the peoples will, to try to rescue humanity before it's too late. And of course, the narrow goal is to provide humanitarian aid to the starving people of Gaza suffering from what the UN has declared to be a famine, which will continue on even through this so-called ceasefire agreement, as Israel, not exactly a trusted ally, not exactly a trusted guarantor, as my tale will reveal, of any standard of international law, but also in trying to mobilize the 45 countries that were represented on that flotilla to say we're going to activate these communities to say, like, if this can happen to us in broad daylight, and if we as the citizens of these countries can be treated in this way, just imagine what's happening in the darkness of the torture and detention camps, where so many thousands of Palestinians are systematically and routinely rounded up and tortured, raped, and sexually and otherwise physically assaulted, without any cameras or journalists or anyone to even report on their names and
Yeah.
their conditions and their prospects.
And it's very clear that there's this term I like to call it collateralization. Like, it's very clear that even amongst people who are upset with Israel, the life, the dignity, the worth of a Palestinian is significantly lower, even amongst like people who would consider themselves to be allies. As opposed to the life of someone living in the Western world. So it seems like this is another part of the reason why you guys put your bodies on the line and put your life at stake. I mean, and before people mention anything about like, oh, well, Israel's not going to do anything to these humanitarian flotillas. I'm Turkish. I saw this firsthand. I watched it unfold in 2010, I believe, when Mavi Marmara tried to break through the illegal Israeli blockade in an effort to bring in by sea humanitarian aid, and Israel dropshipped commandos into that humanitarian aid ship and massacred the humanitarian aid workers and used some of the exact same lies that they have actually not really updated since then. Claiming that these guys were actually being anti-Semitic on the ship, or claiming that they were actually Hamas, or claiming that they had some serious weapons on the ship. So Israel has killed and has attacked even these humanitarian aid flotillas as well, like off the coastline of Tunisia. So
Yeah. I think it's important to tell the story of our flotilla forwards rather than backwards, because both because it gives a sense of kind of how the politics of this kind of direct action work, which I think might be interesting to your viewers and listeners, but also because it helps to break through that myth that somehow humanitarian workers are protected. We know they're not protected, because we know that, those, kitchen workers, for example, were targeted and airstruck by Israel. And of course, it took the international community days and days to try to piece together, was this an accident? The art press is so embarrassing that they can never get ahead of the Zionist lie. They're always trying to catch up with the doublespeak of the Israeli media, and by the time they catch up with the lie, we're onto a new kind of war crime that Israel has committed. But I think it's helpful to tell the story of the Samud flotilla, forward, because it's so scandalous, and I think it's so important to strip back like an onion the layers of through which we've kind of normalized Zionist violence. Like we've gotten to a place where we've come to accept such rogue behavior, and it's fucking crazy. So, we started in Barcelona and sailed onward, and by the time we were in Tunis, which was the first stop where we were going to pick up the Maghreb fleet, this is like the unprecedented, beautiful nature of this Sumud flotilla, which brought together, as I said, 45 countries, delegations from around the world, 500 participants, bigger than the sum of all previous missions, right? So just an honor and a privilege to be part of this mission. We land in Tunis, and my boat, I was having dinner with Francesca Albanese, and we get a call from Thiago Avila, who's one of the lead organizers of the flotilla, who's like, "You got to get down to the port right now. There's been a drone strike." So we hop in the car, we get down to the port. 4 of our crew are on that boat when they hear a quadricopter overhead, and an explosive device is dropped on the boat. At that point, we're like, "What the fuck?" Not only are we a humanitarian mission full of teachers and nurses and ordinary people from around the world doing perfectly legal humanitarian work. We are 400 meters from the presidential palace of Tunisia. So this is just an attack on us. It's an attack on the sovereign nation of
yeah,
Tunisia, which, for all of its faults, had given safe harbor to our flotilla, which is not a small thing in the Arab world, as you well know. A lot of the client states were very beholden to Zionist interests. So we go out condemning this immediately, like, what the hell is going on? The Tunisian authorities, 20 minutes after we're first drone struck, were like, must have been a cigarette or a technical failure
yeah,
on
that
the
was
flotilla.
insane. They
And
just
we're
they
like, oh,
just
wait,
ran cover for Israel, even though it was like filmed.
right. So the CCTV starts to come out as we start to, we're engaged in like basically hourly informational warfare back and forth with the state of Israel. And then the next night in the same port, the second largest vessel has a quadricopter come drop an even bigger explosive device, also caught on CCTV, at which point Tunisian authorities backtrack and say, okay, this was a premeditated attack. We can now kind of see that's clear, but still we're getting the New York Times classic, activists allege drone attacks on the flotilla, right? Which now, days and days later, after we've been disappeared, detained, abused, and beaten in the middle of the fucking desert, Netanyahu comes out and goes, "Yeah, that was us. We ordered that attack on the flotilla." So that's like 2 weeks before we're even in the so-called red zone of where Israel maintains this illegal siege that has been starving and incarcerating the population of Gaza for not just 2 but 20 years. And so, onward we sail, and then we're off the coast of Crete when a fleet of drones, a fleet of quadricopters comes and bombs 13 of the boats, dropping these big C4 explosive devices that are clearly intended to damage the boats beyond repair. Again, putting out an alert to the international community. Again, we're struggling to get traction for this like total act of piracy on the high seas. I mean, we're in like, what other state can you imagine? Just some normal people traveling through the Mediterranean Sea on a sailing mission, and they're just getting bombed by an ally of the United States. And this all, Hassan, is happening before we're even in what's considered to be like the core of the mission, which is the point at which we're supposed to be delivering the humanitarian aid. So this is like the longer story of the flotilla before we even get to the Ben-Gvir nightmare of what was the
Yeah.
past week of our lives, without any access to food, medicine, let alone communication with our lawyers and families. So yeah, I mean, I can get into kind of the last chapter, but I thought I would just pause there to really take in how far we've come to like accept how far we've moved the line of what is acceptable. Obviously,
Yeah.
our government's doing the same thing, just like bombing fishermen boats off the coast of Colombia. It's very much the Pete Hegseth School of International Law, which is like, oops, sorry you're there. We're just going to kill you now.
Yeah.
Um,
And Trump has been
but
rather
it's just still,
shameless about it too, where he has openly flaunted, like, openly made a joke, a mockery of like, oh, if I was a Venezuelan fisherman, I would be very careful, like, talking about the violation of sovereignty of other nations. It's so ridiculous.
and we got the same thing. So, my mentions while I still had internet were all like, hope you can swim. And then, Ziobots that would like post like, gifs of the Titanic sinking. And we were just like,
Yeah.
how have we gotten to a place where you're menacing again, not the lives of like grandfathers? And what made this mission so beautiful is it was composed of truly like courageous a retiree doctor from Menorca and like a school teacher from South Africa who were just brought together by that simple moral conviction that something had to be done to stop this genocide. And so by the time, so we were really fighting this informational warfare because as we were traveling across the Mediterranean to justify those attacks, very similar as you say to what happened in 2010, Israel had a very difficult decision to make about our flotilla. They couldn't decide between two incompatible narratives. Either we were, as they tried to say about Greta's first mission on
A
the Madeleine
selfie
a few
yacht.
months ago, selfie yacht, celebrity cruise, activists just
Yeah.
doing this to self-promote, or we were, some menace to their national security. And this, of course, was the narrative they ultimately went with. We were the Hamas flotilla. And it's good to get into the politics because we had to like work on these boats. We weren't just sailing, we were doing real political work to be like, okay, how do we win back like this narrative, to save our lives, but also to protect the nature of humanitarian work in general, because that lie is repeated all the time. We attacked Al Shifa Hospital because red lines point to Hamas HQ. You have to fight these things in real time because
Yeah.
you can't rely on the CNNs and the New York Times, the MSNBCs to do it for you. So we were really confident about, and we were working our asses off, but we were winning, I think, this informational war. We were getting a lot of attention to the flotilla. People were starting to, really switch on to the fact that like this unprecedented action was, mm, you know, 40 boats with 500 participants really had a chance to kind of overwhelm the quite pathetic Israeli naval forces and get through this siege. And we were drawing a lot of attention to the fact that this siege is not just illegal and criminal, but it's also deeply inhumane and starves Gazans of the basic rights they have to like fish on their shores, let alone sail off of them to see the rest of the world, right? This is the same shore that they share with all the nice places in the Mediterranean that people like to go on vacation. It's the same Mediterranean Sea that we're traversing. And so at that point, we're dragging in some of the states. We've got a big boat from Italy that's supposedly protecting us, a big boat from Spain that's supposedly protecting us, trying to draw in the states to a more serious conflict, a more serious confrontation with the state of Israel that, as I was saying before, they've been trying to avoid for 2 years. And that was a big victory in of itself to try to say this wasn't just about a bunch of brave activists throwing up a fist in the air. We were trying to force the kind of diplomatic confrontation that at the level of the UN, despite the walkouts from, in Netanyahu's speech, were just really not happening at the scale and speed that Israel deserves, for having committed such grave crimes against humanity in front of the world's attention. So that brings us to, the red zone, the night of interception, which is, when everyone is really kind of switching on to our CCTVs. And that night was obviously like a night to be remembered because we were like, you maybe saw this CCTV footage, but like, they came out and immediately at 9 p.m. just boarded with S-13, their special commandos, like the first three big boats that we had, the
Hmm.
largest boats that had between 30 and 40 people on them. But then there were 38 boats left that were still sailing, and we'd all had a pact that we were not going to turn our engines off, even though the boats Israeli Navy was coming to us and saying, turn off your engines. This is the Israeli Navy, turn off your engines. We just kept sailing and sailing and sailing and sailing. In the case of the Owyla, the boat that I was on, with a bunch of decorated U.S. veterans, who themselves put their lives on the line, not just for Gaza, but also in his previous life for the United States of America, we're just sailing on, smoking cigarettes, trying to deliver this humanitarian aid. So, it wasn't until the early hours in the morning that we started to see, some naval ships approaching us and the sniper lasers on our chests, like, okay, this is over. And at that point, Hassan, I had been made aware because I was doing a lot of the diplomatic coordination for the flotilla.
Mm-hmm.
And my job is as general coordinator of the Progressive International, which is this global coalition of parties and unions and movements. So that's a big global network of kind of political actors where we were trying to coordinate and manage and a lot of these actions. At that point, I had been made aware of an agreement, like a secret agreement from between, I think, the Italians, really principally, and the state of Israel, which is that they weren't going to kill us. This was the kind of gift that we were given. They weren't going to kill us that night. And that
Wonderful.
was hard because we were being chased by a giant naval barge that was trying to like crush our ship and kill us at sea. But we felt some degree of protection because of the work that we put in to try to fight this informational warfare, to humanize ourselves, to talk about how we were humanitarian workers and the like. But unfortunately, that was really just like the end of chapter one in a longer saga of
Yeah.
what became the nightmare of our disappearance and detention in Ketziot. Because what came after that, after the cameras stopped rolling, after the CCTVs were crushed and smashed by the IOF, was so much worse than we could have ever expected, and the behavior of the U.S. government was so much more revealingly awful than I think even the veterans could have anticipated.
So this is where I want to ask you a question. For those of you who don't know, David, you're a Jewish American citizen. You now, I believe, live in Europe, right? But you're originally from where I'm from, or where I live now, Los Angeles, and obviously that is supposed to have some kind of weight in the calculation here, both your Jewish background, but also certainly the fact that you're an American citizen. And did you feel as though there was any of that in the calculation at all, in the way that like Israel treated you and everyone else that they had apprehended and kidnapped and detained?
Yeah, I think, growing up in LA in a Jewish community, we were taught that, Israel, the state of Israel, the project of Zionism was sort of contiguous with the United States in terms of our identity, that we had one homeland that was the United States, and it was Dodger Dogs, and it was the Pledge of Allegiance and whatever, but we also had this second homeland that was ours. That was our birthright, as the famous program that used to bring young Jewish Americans over to the state of Israel. And over the course of the recent years, of course, that relationship has frayed. That as more U.S. Jewish Americans of our generation have spoken out against the crimes that have been committed, with our symbols and within our name and singing the songs that we used to sing in synagogues, that as that rupture has begun, so there's been a kind of fraying of that, contiguity, that there's the good Jews and the bad Jews. There's the loyal Jews and the disloyal ones. There's the kapos, as they call me, the self-haters, and then there's the Zionists on the other side.
Yeah.
And that's, of course, why I felt it was so important to go on the flotilla as both a US American whose tax dollars are funding this genocide, but also as a Jewish person whose heritage has been robbed from me in the service of that genocide. So it was both shocking and not surprising that when we got there to the port of Ashdod, where we were stripped of our belongings and our boats were stolen, that they picked up my passport and read my name, which is David Rashi Kremen Adler, and were like, "You Jewish?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm Jewish." And then like ripped me and the other Jewish American by the ear and like sat us, terror style, like this, on our knees and heads down in front of the flag of the state of Israel for a fancy photo op with Ben-Gvir, who of course was very thrilled to bring his goons down to Ashdod port to like taunt us and call us terrorists and yell at us to our faces. And I think the mistreatment of the Jews on the flotilla, definitely didn't stop there. The other Jewish U.S. American that I was with in the internment camp was undergoing severe medical withdrawals in the cell, and begging for medical attention, and they just were like, you're the wrong kind of Jew, and just deprived him even as he was like
Wait,
fainting
is
and
that
suffering.
Quentin Quarantino, the other Jewish American?
Yeah, I'll let him speak for himself, but yeah,
No, no, he's a member of this community as well.
yeah, good friend now,
He's the
good
man.
brother, a brother in arms. But and he put up a good fight, I will say. Love that guy. But and I don't want to like center our identities, because for sure the North Africans and the Muslims were treated the worst of anybody. I mean, they were the ones who were the quickest to be beaten and cuffed and ankle chained and blindfolded and sent into solitary for the day. When they would pray, they would come and with German shepherds and shotguns and beat the shit out of people. um Again, these are humanitarian workers. Like, this is just happening to us, like disappeared into the middle of nowhere with no information that was coming to our families about our condition. But I think it's notable, I think it's very important to explode this myth that there is that contiguity, or that the state of Israel exists to provide something to the Jewish diaspora, when fundamentally the state of Israel is an anti-Semitic endeavor. Fundamentally, it is about robbing Jews of their, I think, most beautiful traditions, of their most literary and learned traditions, of the things that I learned, which were tikkun olam, healing the world, and acting in social justice. And it's trying to, it's so critical that we mobilize now to recover those traditions, because those things made me proud as a young person. My grandfather was part of the Parisian resistance against the Nazis, proud anti-Zionists, proud communists. These are rich traditions of which, Marx and many others are part. And that's what the state of Israel wants to erase. And if you really start digging in there and you start thinking about what happened in the battle between the Yiddish culture that I come from and the modern Hebrew culture of the state of Israel, you start to see that this has always been how the state of Israel has behaved. They've never wanted these untermenschen, Yiddish Jews. They've wanted to build a new Volk, in the state of Israel that could flourish to lead this project of colonial expansion. And so, that's why I say, like, it was both not surprising that we were targeted. It was I mean, on the second day, I remember I was just so happy to be out of the cell, because we were, just like basically just chucked in there and said, rot in here for as long as we wish you to. But I was brought in for this interrogation with like a Mossad agent guy, and I was giving him a hard time, because I was just like, fuck you doing over here? And and he just couldn't wrap his mind around my profile. He was just like, "What is a Jewish American? Like, haven't we given you everything?" Like, they can't wrap their mind around solidarity with the people of Palestine. They can't wrap their mind around why so many peoples of the world would have combined and collaborated and coordinated to be part of this beautiful mission. Because for them, as he told me in this interrogation, it's all about Israelism, the great nation, the great people. Don't think about class divisions. Don't think about your career, as he told me straight to my face while I was sitting in front of him, like being interrogated. Like, we just think about the project. And I was like, truly, Goebbels couldn't have said it better himself. Like, you are just reading me the book here about what you guys truly think and feel. And of course, all this happening under like the great shroud of darkness that was Schiziot prison, 400,000 square meters of concentration camp, where political prisoners from Palestine have long been held. And I'm pretty sure we were sharing it on the other side of the camp with many of them. And all we could hear at night was the howling of German shepherds and F-16s and F-35s, flying overhead to bomb Gaza. Yeah, it was harrowing, and at the same time we knew that we were getting it light, that even as bad as it was to be stripped and zip tied and blindfolded and disappeared, that it was just nothing compared to what, our brothers and sisters on the other side of that camp and the other side of that border were suffering at the same time.
So you were basically face to face with Zionism at its maximalist position as a fascist enterprise. You got to experience a fraction of that, even as a Jewish American. And was there anything that shocked you in this process? Because like you were an anti-Zionist before this, obviously, but is there anything that you even thought they went above and beyond on?
Yeah, I would say there are three things that shocked me in the course of our, I don't want to say detention, I'll say, like disappearance and detention. The first really important thing is that this was the Ben-Gvir show. So one important myth to
Yeah.
explode, I think, in the popular understanding of the political conjuncture in Israel, especially now, is like, yeah, there are clowns in the cabinet, but like they're marginal and they don't represent this government and like they don't represent Zionism even. And that's something that we hear all the time from apologists for this project. But like we were truly handed over to the fucking psychopaths. And okay, maybe they don't run the whole show, but they run enough of it where 500 people from 45 countries were basically treated like as terrorists um, for the crime of like humanitarian. I mean, and so part one was just like being handed over. Part two was the extent. The second thing that really shocked me, Hassan, was like the extent to which they systematically and serially violated our rights. And the anecdotes are myriad. You had a woman who had such a severe kidney infection with no medical attention for 2 days that she was passing out. You had, I mentioned, severe withdrawals. You had cases of diabetics who could not get insulin, and we had to try to like shout our lungs off until someone gave medical attention to cell 16 and cell 17, where you had diabetics who were on the verge of dying from absence of insulin provision from the medics. I mean, there was a moment, after like we had all of our stuff thrown away, and we were not allowed to see our lawyers, and we weren't even given, any shred of due process before we were chucked on these police vans and driven out into the middle of fucking nowhere, where we were just like, oh shit, they do not care about any part of this laws, norms, and institutions that supposedly govern civil society. Like this is just a state gone so rogue that we are all at their whims. And that brings me to the third most shocking thing, which was the behavior of the United States government. A lot of the states or nations that were represented in this flotilla, their governments were knocking down the door of that prison, demanding to see our conditions, demanding to see their citizens, demanding to represent them legally. The US government was like, let them rot in these dungeons.
Yeah.
They showed up 4 days into our detention like a JV coach. Like, listen up, fucks. Like, you're on your own. Nothing we can do for you. Your fate is exclusively decided by the state of Israel. We were like, in a like a cage, like being talked to by three consular people from Tel Aviv, being like, you can't do anything to help secure our freedom. We haven't committed a crime. We were kidnapped and taken here. All of our stuff was stolen from us. There's nothing you can do. They're like, there's nothing you can do. You can check this box on a privacy form and we can tell your families that you're alive, but that's the maximum that we can do to help you. And that was not even as bad as we got it on the other side of the border. So for very conjunctural reasons, and for this, like, God bless Trump's vainglorious pursuit of the Nobel Peace Prize, we were liberated in the last group of 130 abductees who were taken to Jordan.
Yeah.
But on the other side of the border, when we got to Jordan, as you can imagine, the Mexicans and the Brazilians and the South Africans were hugging and delighted to see their citizens. They were providing them with food and shelter and tickets home. And we're just so happy to be able to communicate with cell phones, calling their families. Our consul was there like this, Sharon. We are not your babysitters. You will not be getting food or water or tickets home or clothes or a cell phone or anything. You are on your own. You were not your babysitters. And did I mention this before? We're not your babysitters. We're not your babysitters, and there's nothing we can do for you. So you're lucky that your government has comped you of a transit visa. So the Jordanians are going to drive you out of the airport, or we're going to drop you there with no cell phone and no money and in your prison clothes, unshowered, because of course we had no access to showers and never were allowed to leave our cells. And good fucking luck. And that was how the U.S. government behaved. And of course, again, it's shocking and not surprising. It speaks to another big myth, which is that the State Department, I mean, in the kind of like zero dark 30 imagination, is like here to like save, rescue, find you, where are U.S. citizens? This is as far as I know, and I haven't been online to like fact check this on any serious way, but the largest scale abduction of US citizens, certainly by an ally in modern history, and no response. Our families were calling the embassy like getting hung up on, getting audio played back to them, like, and this is, in my mind when we were sitting and rotting in this jail, I was having these fever dreams, Hassan, where I was like,
How did you feel about
you
your
know,
senators inaction, which
right,
is something I want to talk about as someone from California as well? Because we were like, there were a lot of people actively in the United States of America, specifically in Los Angeles, specifically in California, that were trying to get our senators to make a fuss about the extraction of U.S. citizens from California.
yeah. So like, when I'm sitting there, like, totally unable to sleep because they were so committed to sleep deprivation, they were like blaring sounds and doing counts and switching cells all night to keep us kind of sleep deprived. So I had a lot of hours to just stare and think. And in my mind, so foolish and so naive, and it's so embarrassing to admit because I am a clear-eyed political thinker. I like to think by day when I'm less sleep deprived. In my mind, I'm thinking some senator from the Democratic Party is picking up the ball that we dropped and is on a plane to Tel Aviv and is on his way here now and is bringing his comms guy, and they're going to go, we want to see our citizens like they did in El Salvador, and we put a ball on a tee for them. We understand it's hard to criticize the state of Israel and the United States. We understand that APAC has exercised structural leverage. That's why little Jewish boy David from the San Fernando Valley got on a fucking boat and went to Gaza and did this whole thing because we were prepared to endure some degree of suffering or some smaller or greater degree of suffering. Obviously, nothing in comparison to what Palestinians like. For us, it was an experience. For them, it's fucking reality. But we
Yeah,
were happy. We were like not happy, but we were prepared and clear eyed about what was likely to be coming our way without trying to apologize or normalize the illegality of our abduction, so that these Democrats could pick up the ball, so that they could score the easiest points against the state of Israel. Like, we just handed you a political grenade with, and forget me, like US veterans, people who like, you know, were prepared to give their lives in service of the country. I left the country after university because I have lots of qualms with the cruelty and inequalities of our society. And my political energies have been inverted mostly in places like Latin America and in Europe. But still, like of course, I was having these dreams like, oh well, we're gonna set off some reaction that will be salubrious for the solidarity movement for Palestine. And I got out and I did, like, in the first hours, like just like unshowered and unkempt, got a phone and just Googled like flotilla NYT and was just like, oh shit, nothing has happened. Well, except
yeah.
for Mike Huckabee calling me a Hamas lover, like to my, quote tweeting me and calling me a Hamas, tool. And I
I
think that's the thing that I'm still not over is just
yeah.
the ways in which, like, we did our best to set up, and in many ways, the flotilla was a success on its own terms. We were seeing these videos of Gazan fishermen being able to fish for the first time in months and months because we had just successfully distracted these naval forces, and that's all that we need to feel good about the success of the mission, that some Gazans could literally survive and have food for a few days while we were in detention, of course. But in terms of, to going back to your first question about evolving public opinion, like, we also wanted to activate these communities, and it was, I came back and it's so beautiful to see so many Angelinos and Californians, and big up to Rokana for like leading on this process and talking to my family. I just can't believe it fell to the families themselves to do this kind of advocacy work, because this was not a hard case to make, that this was criminal, illegal, cruel, and inhumane. And I just, yeah, I'm still grappling with that failure and what it means. And I'm trying to update my priors on what it tells us about US American politics today.
It
But
it just
but that's the part I'm
from
dealing
the
with.
outside looking in, it felt like the American government wanted to punish you. Like and they were not shy about letting Israel do that. Like
And I
they
think we
saw you
yeah.
guys as like spoilers.
And I think we would still be there if it weren't for this Peace Prize little campaign that he's on. Like, I think it was clear. and this is such an important point for your audience, like there is a conception of the US passport that it is a golden one, that we have this passport privilege because we have certain protections. And that covenant like is broken. And I think it's not a coincidence that we were treated by our own governments worse than basically any other delegation on this flotilla when we were in this prison, at the same time as the Trump administration is deploying the army to Portland and Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
It's about this fundamental division that the Trump administration is installing in very like textbook fascist ways between what they consider to be good, righteous, and protected U.S. citizens and bad, perverted Antifa, whatever you want to call them, the citizens that basically deserve to be legally stripped of their of passports and obviously stripped of the rights that are attendant to them, those passports. And so it was deeply revealing in that way, like, oh, it's come this far that you don't even want to protect your reputation as a
Yeah.
global guarantor of US American rights. That used to be such a point of pride for so many years. You know, you think back to a hostage crisis and all the propaganda, all the movies that get made about how we are always protecting our own, and all the shows and Narcos and all this stuff that's all about like we'll go to any length to get our own. And it's just we don't live in that world anymore. We don't live in that country anymore, and it's important that we reclassify US passports as being a high risk passport when you're in the outside world. This is, you're not from that lovely first world country that's going to help you. You're from the United States of America, and they don't give a fuck about you.
Yeah. It's pretty devastating. I feel like the liberal international order is a sham. I mean, it's been a sham, but now it's falling apart for everyone to see. Do you feel as though because you also brought up the fact that the genocide in Gaza, the genocide of the Palestinians, has had reverberations that not only have been consequential for a lot of people mobilizing against their own governments, but also has made people start to recognize that the liberal democratic order may be a lie. And in an effort to appease the masses and the mass discontent, it seems like a lot of these liberal countries in Europe have tried to create a pressure valve in an effort to make it seem as though they're in an effort to basically make it seem as though democracy is still real and they're still looking at mass mobilization and they're reacting in some way. One of those ways was the symbolic recognition, state recognition for Palestine, which was conditional recognition to begin with. But do you feel, or even the Samud flotilla getting protection, not all the way, but at least like getting protection up to a certain point was, I think, both unexpected and also done to abide by the discontent that was happening in places like Italy with general strikes and whatnot.
Yeah.
Do you feel like right now with this Gaza ceasefire and this Gaza peace plan that is being negotiated on, do you feel like that is going to lead to some kind of long-lasting, guaranteed cessation of hostilities, or what is your assessment on that?
I think it's way too early to tell how this thing will unfold, and I don't want to be fatalistic about a moment of reprieve, a potential moment for reprieve
Yeah.
that could provide so much an opportunity for Gazans to eat and to sleep and to stay in their homes and not have to flee or rebuild from scratch, from day to day. But if the past is any ledger to the future, I think that we need to be very clear-eyed about the integrity of the state of Israel in respecting ceasefire agreements and respecting these types of exchanges and the fundamental rules that are supposed to accompany any type of peace process arrangement. And with Trump as a guarantor of that process, it's obviously you have to wonder, like it seems pretty dubious because it's so short-sighted and so vainglorious in terms of his pursuit of recognition as some kind of deal-making peacemaker. But I think to your point about these liberal countries in the West trying to find a way to accommodate both their Zionist loyalties or institutional kind of imbrications and some, if rhetorical, recognition of the state of Palestine, even as people are being exterminated and communities are being destroyed and, people are being evicted from their ancestral territories. I think it's not a coincidence that it's the peoples of the global South that are the first to recognize those inequities, the farcical nature of what you call the liberal international order. One of the things that we do at the Progressive International is help to coordinate a group. It's called the Hague Group. The Hague Group is a group of a global bloc of nations that are committed to taking concrete actions to stop the genocide and to defend international law. It's countries like South Africa that have taken the state of Israel to the ICJ. It's countries like Colombia, whose president has been a very vocal advocate at tremendous personal and political cost for the state of Israel, as well as countries like Cuba, who've been steadfast allies of the Palestinian cause, and Malaysia, who have also stood up and in the Samud flotilla, as an ally there, but also more generally. These are countries that recognize that the existential risk to, I think when it comes to the international order, I'm reminded of like the title of my friend Astor Taylor's book about democracy. But I think, my sense is like the international order never existed, but we'll miss it when it's gone. There is a sense in which we never really had the famous protections and institutions that were going to provide, unbridled prosperity and promote democracy around the world. And still, there's systematic erosion and the indulgence of Western powers of the rogue behavior of the state of Israel that erodes them is leading us towards a fundamentally more dangerous global conjuncture, which is one of a coercive and unilateralist vision where basically might makes right, of course, but like we make jokes, as you say, about don't get on that boat. Don't We're just going to kill you for sport, and that's obviously where our new, what's it called, the Secretary of War. That's his view of the world. Just fuck it. We'll do whatever we
Yeah.
want, and I think we have to take stock of that because it's I don't this I s- you know I would never apologize for the crimes of George W. Bush, but they were the all of that was frame the Iraq War and these horrible crimes that were committed when we were youngsters. Those were all framed in terms of that international law,
Yeah.
international order, and that
there was there
revealed its
was
function.
a there was a permission structure that they tried to design and justify the unjust and illegal occupation of Iraq. Even the lies, the WMD's lie and whatnot, like that was carefully and meticulously crafted in an effort to at least like gain the support of the world, as opposed to what is happening now, where they don't even try anymore. Trump just says, "Oh, these guys are actually narco terrorists, and even if they're not, even if they're fishermen, they can die because we want to do regime change in Venezuela."
Yeah, and we always granted ourselves the exception to whatever rules we were enshrining, but I think it's very difficult to foresee the truly apocalyptic consequences of this centrifugal force that Israel has unleashed in the world, which is just to basically erode any kind of international norms or institutions or international humanitarian law or any protections for citizens. It's giving cover for autocrats everywhere, aligned as they are in this kind of reactionary international, to move ahead with this common agenda that's basically just kill, destroy, maim, dispossess. And I think, underlying all that, I would be remiss not to say this as a Marxist, like there is a political economic structure of, how do we continue with the process of accumulation by dispossession? How do we continue to, brutalize in order to enrich? Like it's not a coincidence that all of this is happening at the same time as we have this massive explosion of inequality. It's not a coincidence that our biggest tech firms are so complicit in this genocide. It's not a coincidence that, we have these billionaires kneeling at the altar of Trump at the same time as he's repressing, a dissent in the country. It's of a piece and at a global scale. And so the way that global capitalism now can function is basically through these new capital securitized droney, this nexus of security technologies, which include surveillance, of course, and hyper extraction, that that are fun, that are still, of course, their struggles over land and their struggles over ancestry and identity, but they're also struggles over like fucking making money. And lots of people are making a lot of money, and we just live in this mobster state, and that's the kind of thing that they want to export to the world. It's just,
I
you
wouldn't even
know,
say lots of people are making money. I feel like it's a handful of people making money, and that number of people making money is like getting smaller and smaller. If you look at the stock market gains or the gains of the GDP over this past year, the overwhelming majority came from a hand of a select few AI companies as opposed to everything else. So it's just like being propped up by this false confidence in the stock market, and
and they're
it's
not they're not productive companies. I mean, these
yeah.
companies aren't making anything, it's just it's this swarms of speculative capital. And so I just think that we have to, we can't look at the security thing in isolation, just as we can't look at the economic thing in isolation. I think we need to take stock of like really how scary the conjuncture is now. I think as leftists, one thing we really are not good at thinking about is w- what new security technologies mean for us. I think we still, in our imaginations of resistance, we harken back to previous political junctures, be they like, the Cuban Revolution or the Russian Revolution or whatever it is, where you could have a fake passport or you could, run the underground. I mean, we don't live in that world. We live in a world where every message we write is being read. We live in a world where a quadricopter could arrive at my window here and just shoot me dead and fly away, and no one would ever be held accountable for that. It's we're I think I worry that we're behind the conjuncture, and part of the flotilla and part of the Hague Group and part of these vanguard initiatives is like, how do we catch up with the bad guys who are leading the conjuncture, who are recognizing this opportunity, both inside the Trump camp, but also opportunists far outside of it, who are like, something is really changing, and have to get ours right now. And I think that we're slow to organize, I think, around. I'm not saying this just for the U.S. left, but I think globally, and this is obviously a challenge to myself and my colleagues at the Progressive International, who task ourselves with trying to coordinate the international left, is like, how do we catch up with where, the Ukraine war has led us? Which, whatever the merits or demerits of that conflict, has been a laboratory for drone technologies that
Yeah.
are not just going to boomerang back to the United States, but will be sold to every dictator around the world. I mean,
Yeah.
tomorrow, Daniel Noboa, who basically, stole an election in Ecuador and became a US client overnight and made his country into the most like murderous capital in Latin America, will be importing drones that he will use domestically to like kill his opponent. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
mean to sound apocalyptic in this way, but we have to start analyzing this conjuncture, and trying to predict these scenarios, and how we're going to organize to prevent some of the more apocalyptic scenarios that are staring us in the face now, because I'm just incredibly worried. And there's a reason why I didn't come back straight to the United States. I know obviously it was like it's as I came out of prison, was made aware that I had been one of the more kind of visible detainees as part of this flotilla. And I was given no guarantee in my conversation with the consul that, we were going to be not detained again in the United States. And I wanted some time to get my head straight and come to a country, France, where I'm also a citizen, where I could get my head straight and think about like how, what's going to happen when I come home, and or back to Los Angeles or wherever, like I I just think we need to do some thinking. I mean, obviously my head's not screwed on totally straight after this experience, but I just need to think a little bit more about, together with you and friends and comrades and whatever, about like, how do we grapple um with the hypertrophy of this swelling apparatus that is pitted against us, and amid myriad problems of disorganization, fragmentation, and like struggles to get organized as leftists. Like, how do we think about survival and response to that apparatus, as it continues to grow in scale, scope, and strength against us?
Yeah. And I do feel like mass mobilization is necessary at this moment, and yet Americans, by and large, even when it comes to domestic endeavors, like the creeping, I wouldn't even say the fascist creep that is imminent. I would say that we are already in the treacherous waters of fascism, for sure, with like military deployments at the domestic front. And obviously like a swelling ICE budget that is even less accountable than local police in this regard. Um, Basically Trump having his own Gestapo force, and in the absence of any sort of like countermeasure or any sort of like labor militancy, any sort of organizing, it feels like a lot of Americans are completely oblivious to everything that's going on. And when you talk to like normies, they'll just like laugh about Trump saying Hakeem Jeffries is Mexican in an AI video, and they think that's funny. And even if their pockets are hurting, I think that they're not steered in the appropriate direction to understand exactly how that's happening, exactly uh, how much this is a byproduct of the system that was designed to be this way. And
Yeah,
it does terrify me for sure.
I
So
think it's yeah.
to leave it on a positive note, what gives you hope in this entire endeavor?
Yeah, I think, part of my job as co-general coordinator of the Progressive International is to be in conversation with and in coordination with unions and parties and movements all around the world. And what gives me hope is seeing the creative, determined, committed responses by a lot of those left forces around the world in places where the left is organized and is in power to try to devise ways to kind of US proof the world. And that can start small and go large. So it starts small with revising trade agreements that would allow corporations to sue states for billions of dollars for the simple crime of like raising wages or protecting the environment. It can go all the way to building continental blocks with their own security arrangements to try to like excise Israeli technology and US American technological influence to reduce dependencies that they have on the United States so they can make sovereign decisions about their future, as we're seeing in other, parts of the global south. So I think, looking south for me has been a way to transcend that well of
Oh,
desolation, desperation, or depression and try to
oh,
find source
I'm
source of
sorry, David.
inspiration.
We got someone who wants to say hello to you. It seems
I
this is
it
my
was
dog.
I think, yeah, your dog was feeling deeply inspired as well by the global Southern, insurgency.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh God.
and so
She's trying to get on top of me. Um,
I can imagine.
Sorry. Go ahead.
No, no, I'm trying to find the words, to sort of leave on that positive note. I just think we have to keep from the US, we have to keep looking for sources of inspiration, past, present, and building to the future that come from other country cases. We have to be more curious about the rest of the world. We have to be more engaged and collaborative and seeking ways to basically understand how, in the process of this sort of decline of our empire, violent centrifugal forces that are building the United States, we can be allies of that process of US proofing the world. We can be allies of a
Yeah.
process that many countries are taking really seriously about how to, build out an agenda of sovereignty, economic, social, and political, as you say, the international order kind of crumbles underneath our feet.
Sorry. Yeah.
I know it's
Oh
my
God.
inspirational rhetoric. That's
Oh,
that's
she's
that's,
a.
that's
Sorry. Okay. No, no, no. You can't. Okay. No, no, no. You can't get on my lap. Okay. I apologize.
that's all right.
David, thank you so much for the inspirational words. Um, that was, I mean, there are a lot of people who ask this question, and that's why I wanted to ask you this question in particular, because you've put a lot of time and effort into this with Progressive International, and also obviously you have put your, in some ways, you put your security on the line, your body, your life on the line with the participation in the Sumud flotilla. So thank you so much for continuing to be an inspiring figure in a time where we desperately need more of those. People are asking, how can we get involved in Progressive International? Before I let you go, can you give an answer to that?
Yeah, sure. So, we are an organization, we are an international that sort of is designed for the 21st century. So we want to work with all types of political organizations. So it's not with individuals. Unfortunately, we don't have like individual membership. But the basic idea is, we believe that it's going to take a village to defeat that great reactionary international that's built into the name that Noam Chomsky gave us at our founding 5 years ago. This great contrast between a galloping reactionary international and a slightly slower, but we're growing progressive international that's now reaching its 5 year mark. So we want to work with everyone from centers of research who have been like, for example, the foundry for our investigations on the arms trade and the weapons shipments to Israel that's led to new arms embargoes in Spain, for example. We want to work with publications to try to disseminate critical perspectives from grassroots and frontline struggles. We want to work with, of course, political parties and trade unions that are trying to do their part. And I think the point to your audience is a very simple one, that like it's going to take all of us. If you're good at being in formal politics, go into formal politics. If you're good at organizing your workplace, organize your workplace. If you're good at writing, then write. And like it's going to take all of these political resources to try to mount a response at the scale that the present conjuncture requires. And so, if you're part of one of those organizations and you want to be part of an international that's trying to take on our reactionary adversaries, then yeah, get in touch and we should talk.
I think they might have broken the site for the application, but thank you, David Adler, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much, David, for coming on. Hopefully we'll get to have you, if you come back to Los Angeles at any point, we'll have you on the stream physically as well.
Thanks, brother. It's a pleasure. Yeah.
All right.
Take
Bye.
care.
All right. That was David Adler, a participant in the we DDoS them accidentally. Yeah. Someone who participated in the Summit Flotilla, an inspirational figure, and someone who I have the honor of calling a comrade.